Do we have sound from the speaker?
Right now, folks, we're just letting the slideshow run, so there's no sound, but very shortly. So this is our 2021 program. We are now in April looking at a food system for a one planet region. And then next month we'll be looking at buildings and then travel and transportation. So this is tonight's program, and in starting our program off, I should acknowledge that we are living on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, and this evening we're going to be talking about a one planet food system for our region, and we have two speakers. I will introduce them in just a moment, Linda Gege and Pierre Shetty. And just as a little bit of background, and I think Linda uses the same slides, but it's bears repeating, when you look at the ecological footprint of Saanich, the work that was done by Jenny Moore and Cora Holsworth, you find that a very large chunk of the food footprint is due to land and energy use. And in particular, this large 54% is fish, meat and eggs. And so those are big issues when it comes to our food footprint and thinking about a one planet food system. So these are our process, and thanks to Gege and to Claire for managing the breakout room assignments. And we will be going into breakout rooms a little after 6 o'clock. And these are some reminders from Jan Ingalls about, in those small groups, things to think about. So just to more appropriately acknowledge the land where we live and work and breathe and create, the land of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and also that as the conversations, we're deeply committed to highlight the rich diversity of peoples in our communities. And so with that by way of background, I will just introduce our two speakers and we'll get down to it. So first of all, the topic, as I say, is a food system for a one planet region. So what we're trying to think about is, what would a food system look like if we only use the equivalent of one planet's worth of biocapacity and resources? What would that mean for this region? And that will be the topic of the small group discussions too. So we're very pleased and honored to have two great speakers on this. The first speaker is Linda Geggie, who is the Executive Director of the Capital Region Food and Agricultural Initiatives Roundtable, which understandably they abbreviate to CRFAIR, and also the Good Food Network. So Linda's been actively working on regional food system issues since the early 1990s. Many of us know her and respect the work she's done very much. She's been instrumental in building and shaping CRFAIR, and in addition, she's a member of the Peninsula and Area Agricultural Commission and co-chair of the BC Food Systems Network, and has been recognized by Food Secure Canada with the Kathleen Neen Award. And for those of you who had the pleasure of knowing Kathleen Neen, that's a great honor. Mm-hmm. And our second speaker, who will be following Linda, is Pierre Shetty, And Pierre is a professional agrologist and a registered professional planner, and he is the agriculture and food security planner for Saanich. He's spent his 20-year professional career working with communities, academia, governments, not-for-profits, industry, and corporations on a wide range of issues around conserving biodiversity, adapting to and mitigating climate change, and using science, planning, and market tools. So we have two very well equipped and qualified presenters, and I'm going to turn this over to Linda, and they both of us have PowerPoints to share with us. So Linda, Pierre, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And Linda, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Trevor, and the One Planet Saanich group for hosting the conversation. And I'll just start with the fun fact to Pierre. I have known Pierre for a very long time as well. He was a board member when I was, I founded Life Cycles. Some of you may know Life Cycles. And back in the day, Pierre was a board member with Life Cycles. And just up until recently, he also was refereeing my son's rugby. So I've had a few really cool connections with Pierre. And probably a fun fact, you didn't know that Pierre was a rugby referee. So I'm really glad to be here today, and happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm going to be sharing my screen. So it's going to be, I won't be able to see you. If you have questions, you can throw them in the chat. But honestly, it's very difficult to see those questions in the chat. For the speaker when the screen share is on. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to get to those questions afterwards. But I've just prepared a presentation for you today, and I'm just going to put my timer on. I know I've got 15 minutes. So just first of all, wanted to start out and say, over the last 20 years, there has, since my experience of being here as a settler in this area, I came from the Okanagan, from Seal territory, and I came to University of Victoria, and I got involved in food activism work, and in the 1990s, as Trevor said, when people were starting to really look at sustainability, and in that picture, sustainable food systems. And there was a number of groups and organizations that came together from all different perspectives, either a health perspective, environmental perspective, economic development perspective, faith-based and spiritual perspective, all who had a real interest in food. I mean, we all eat, and so we all have that interest, but people really could understand that the food system that we had was broken, wasn't meeting we could do a lot better. So this organization this network grew into something called the Good Food Network. And of course, when I go to move my slides along, let's see if I can get it to work now. Why it worked when we did sorry, there we go. I got it now. Okay, so I'm just gonna let you know a little bit about the Good Food Network. Also, some of the facts that are motivating people to really understand that we need to make some serious changes in our food system, in the way that we move food from where it's grown, produced, or cultivated to our plates. And tell you a little bit about give you some resources to learn more information, because I can't cover it all in a 15-minute presentation, but also then to talk a little bit about what the impacts of climate change will be in our region, and really want to talk to you about some responses. We're all about, this forum is about discussion and learning and action. And I want to let you know, first of all, there's a lot of things already underway in the region. And I know we're going to be talking about what can we do to create a One Planet based food system. And I would encourage everyone to think about what is already going on and join forces with the groups, organizations, and academics and health promoters and educators that are already working on these issues. There's always room for more voices and more action. And so I want to end there with talking to you about some of the local responses that are going on. So just briefly, what is a Good Food Network? It's a network that's working to promote healthy, just, and sustainable food systems. And we are working through a collective impact model where we have some very long-term outcomes in a strategy called Good Food 2025. The network is made up of nonprofits, teachers, researchers, students, food processors, makers, local government, planners. We have fishers, farmers, funders, and investors, and it's led by a leadership group that comes from a representation of folks from those different sectors. What do we do as the network? We focus on one, capacity building. How can we be stronger, work better, work smarter together, and collaborate towards the change that we see. We do a lot of work on communications, just with monthly newsletter, annual food conference where we bring everybody together, as well as a number of webinars, and the different working groups have different forums for communicating about the issues that they work with. We do work on policy advocacy. And as I said, we're really working on fostering collective action behind some shared goals. All of this is on our website and the Good Food Network website. So I know I might be breezing by it kind of quick, but I really want to get down to talking about climate and food. So the 2025 goals that we're all working towards are really focused on 3 different impact areas: the local food economy, food literacy, and food access and equity. And all of these intersect with the work around climate change. We know that regionalized food systems are one of the stepping stones towards creating less of a footprint around the food that we eat. And so that's one of our major areas of work, is trying to bolster a regional food system. So just some motivating facts are like, why is this such a big deal? Or why is food a big deal when we're talking about climate change? Well, we know that there's a number of different studies that calculate in different ways the impacts of the global food system, that anywhere from a quarter to 70%. This one study that I'm quoting is 60% of emissions come from food systems, and we have a huge reliance on that system, the global food system, with over between 10% being grown and up to 22 to 25% when we're right in the height of our season of food locally, but we import a lot of food. We also have a lot of food waste happening in Canada, 2.2 million tons. And really, these are pointless emissions, this food waste. And so we need to reduce food waste. And we also know that regional conditions are changing due to climate change. So we are going to need to adapt. Not only are we trying to decrease what is happening, but we need to adapt because it is happening. So I just wanted to reference a couple of reports for you to have a look at. One is the Climate Change in Food Systems in the Capital Region District. And I believe this PowerPoint will be available to you afterwards. And these are live links that you can go and look at them. The other one is a Vancouver Island Strategies Plan, which is really looking at agriculture and climate adaptation. So I'm also referenced here the summary report of the EcoCity footprint, and I've taken all of the stats and things in my presentation are from these reports, just so that you can have a sense of where they're coming from. So in a nutshell, what are the impacts of climate change? This is basically focused on our local food system. Obviously, there's impacts on the global food system that are going to be huge in terms of the shifting weather patterns, geopolitical unrest. We're going to see shifts and changes globally, but here at home, and that's huge because we rely on that system so much, but here at home, climate impacts that we're going to see is, in some cases, it sounds good. There's going to be a longer growing season, but this is because we're going to see a temperature change happen with warmer, drier summers and wetter, longer winters. But these are going to be there's going to be a lot of disruptions related to these weather patterns. Even though we have a longer growing season, we're going to see a lot of extreme weather conditions like heavy rainfall, long droughts. And this is going to cause a lot of learning in we have a really talented food producers. The oceans also is another area we need to think about, the rise in temperature and the change in ocean levels and the salination of soils that will come from that. But really understanding all of these changes and knowing what can we do to adapt to this variability and with different crops and crop suitability. We're also going to see a lot of increase and changes in pestilence, which is a huge thing for growers to contend with. They're already seeing, we had a farmer to farmer roundtable where we were asking what farmers were already seeing, and they're seeing changes in pest and disease. And the precipitation cycles, we're going to see a lot of demand on water and less snowpack, less rainfall overall, even though we're going to see extreme conditions. So this is all going to impact food growing, and whether that's agriculture systems or foraging or ocean-based food, that's going to impact across the board. So Trevor, this came up earlier that Trevor pointed out that the ecological footprint of our current consumption patterns is very high. As you can see, over 54% coming from fish, meat, and eggs, and also through land use, the kinds of emissions that we're going to see, and the kind of energy that it's requiring for producing the different types of food. So we're going to have to think a lot about what our diet is going to look like, and also how are we going to produce it with all of this change that's coming. So there's been quite a bit of discussion about what are the kinds of things that individuals can do. And also we need to be looking upstream at what are the systems change things that we can undertake to support this change and transition process. And so I have a very good friend who specializes in behavior change, and we talked about this at an earlier One Planet Saanich conversation, was what is going to shift behavior change in individuals? And one of the things that we learn is that we only have so much capacity to make decisions on an ongoing basis. And so we need to make the choices easy. We need to make systems that support healthy and sustainable eating. So that's part of approaching it from two different levels. One, the individual level, what kind of choices can we make, but also creating systems that are helping build the food systems that we need, and also the making those choices available to people. We have huge disparities in income and high costs of living in this area. Affordable housing is such an issue, living wage, all of those things impact people's ability to make choices about the food they eat. And we know very well that the lower the income that people have, the limited choice and the cheap food options are the ones that are accessible. And so we're also seeing, some positive redistribution of fresh fruits and vegetables to those populations, but equity has to be part of our solutions conversation. So what can we do as individuals? These are the things that have been gleaned out of the conversations over the years, is that really eating local and in season as much as possible is going to be a really important step forward. We saw last year with the pandemic, there was a real interest in this, and people looking at growing more of their own food. And we have seen that, I talked to one farmer, there was over 300% increase in sales at their farm market. And we saw a 50% raise in people growing food as part of our programs. So the other thing is reducing climate culprits in your diet. So looking at that footprint and seeing if you can have reduce your consumption of those heavy carbon emitting production systems that are we talked about meat and dairy and eggs. Reducing waste is another area that we really need to work on. Learning how to use leftovers, learning how to store food better. And that's just at the individual level, of course. And then supporting low carbon and ecological farming, regenerative agriculture. So when we're going out and we're seeking that, if we have that option, that's a good one. So in terms of systems, these are the kinds of things that people are really also talking about. Culture shift being the number one thing that we need to create, a shift from human-centered, extractive ways of living on this planet to a worldview that sees humans as part of a living, breathing ecosystem. And we really need to understand that we cannot divorce ourselves from that. That's what the One Planet Initiative is all about. So the things that we can do to support local food systems in particular is investing in local agriculture and food systems infrastructure. We used to have a lot more local production and distribution. Pre-contact, of course, it was 100% local with some trading going on. And then colonial food systems came in and took hold, and we've seen a huge decline in since the early days to where those food systems have been able to been degenerated since the 1950s. We don't have, you know, the packing and the distribution and the food hubs and the kinds of supports for the farm community either. Also, we need to invest in education and training and learning about regenerative agriculture and carbon sequestration. How there's a whole bunch of strategies that we can use in our agriculture sector to decrease the impacts of the way that we're producing food locally. And of course, reducing food waste up and down the line, not just individuals, but industries and institutions need to be looking at, and we need to look at polluter pay kind of policy that is going to create actually viable incentives. So I just want to spend the last minute or two that I have to tell you about some good news. The good news is there is a whole range of initiatives going on in this region to try and do work in each of those strategy areas. So in terms of culture shift, we're looking at a whole, the farm to school program. So really working with youth and having youth learn at an early age about where their food comes from and the different impacts of their food choices. We're also looking at, you know, a whole range of food literacy programs and initiatives like Squanamito and Palenque Greens, which are looking at all of the cultural foods and the revitalization of those cultural food systems. And we need to address some of the colonial impacts on those food systems. So there's also a whole range of initiatives in the region looking to support local agriculture and food systems infrastructure. The Closing Supply Gap Initiative, trying to look at, like, there is a strong demand for local food. There is a supply gap. Most of the food that you find available that is locally produced is at the farm gate or farmers markets. There's very little that you can find in the retail store. There's a whole system that is set up to with a heavy competition from cheap exports that holds local food from the ability to get it into the stores. So there's a lot of work on creation of food hubs. There's the regional food hub that we're working on. Salt Spring Island also has a food hub, and also regional distribution initiatives like the South Island Farm Hub, the Cowichan Co-op, and a lot of work to try and support local farmers to get the certification and deal with the regulatory systems about selling into wholesale and retail markets. So just to close, also investment in climate friendly food production. So there's the Sandown Center for Regenerative Agriculture. We're trying to bring back Extension, which is specifically focused on climate friendly food growing to the region to support farmers and food growers, looking at water storage and flood programs to try and adapt to some of those changing climate weather induced changes, and looking at how we can care for soils in a way that we are not releasing carbon and losing organic matter. That's really important. And the other one is really about reducing food waste as well. The Love Food, Hate Waste campaigns and a lot of advocacy efforts going in to try and stop. This is an area that could use more work, is in industrial and restaurant and institutional food waste reduction. So Thank you. That was a lot to fit into 15 minutes. I'm glad you, I could have the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm happy to answer questions. I know I flew through it pretty quick. There's lots more to learn from the resources that I provided, and also you can hook into our websites, which have this information is on our websites as well. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Linda. That was great and a grand overview. I think what we'll do is move on and hear first from Pierre so that people can respond to both of you together. And thank you for releasing the screen, by the way. And then we'll have time for questions after that. And the simplest way for questions, folks, is to put them in the chat box. We've got about 37, 38 people on, and it can be hard to pick out waving hands or raised hands off such a big set of screens. So pop your questions in the box. I can read them out to Linda and Pierre, but first let's hear from Pierre. So Pierre, over to you.
Great, thanks, Trevor. And thanks for your presentation, Linda. It's a great overview, a higher level look at agriculture and food security. And I'm going to focus more specifically on the district of Saanich. I also want to acknowledge that we live and work and benefit from living within Coast and Strait Salish people's territories and the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Saanich peoples. Something just popped up. There we go. Okay, now it wants to move. So just a brief introduction. As Trevor said, my name is Pierre Shetty. I'm a professional agrologist and a registered professional planner. I'm the agriculture and food security planner with the district of Saanich, and that is a part-time contract position. I'm also a consulting agrologist and a sustainability planner. And I was speaking with Trevor previously, just mentioning that I do a lot of work with Indigenous peoples around food security. So I'm just going to briefly kind of highlight that work and then focus on the Saanich agriculture and food security planning work. So the work that I do with First Nations, there's a lot of common elements. The main one is to feed the nation. They use that as a vehicle for self-determination, cultural revitalization, growing traditional foods, which help with learning traditions and healthier diets. I've also been asked to develop agriculture and business feasibility plans for First Nations, where they're looking to create economic opportunity, capacity building, and income. And so there's a number of opportunities around that. South Nation has greenhouses, they grow wasabi, they also grow food for their community. And so in wanting to feed the nation, there's often a wanting to especially distribute food to elders, making sure they have healthy traditional foods, single parent homes and low income families. And there's a lot of engagement around that work around just what are nutritious foods, looking at some of the traditional foods and growing those, food box programs. And then just jumping to the Saanich Agriculture and Food Security Plan, its vision is in Saanich, food security starts in our backyard. And it has a much longer part of the vision, which is, by 2030, Saanich is home to a thriving, accessible, and environmentally responsible food system. Our food is celebrated and recognized for its role in nourishing people, livelihoods, and relationships. And there's also this leadership piece for Saanich in advancing food security, initiatives toward greater food self-sufficiency on the South Island, as well as dignified access to affordable, healthy food for all people. And we recognize that within that, ecosystems need to flourish as the result of responsible land and water stewardship, both in the urban and rural agricultural lands. And we protect and support our farmland, and we provide a vibrant agricultural legacy to future generations. So that's the guiding vision for the Agriculture and Food Security Plan. And I'm sure you all know that Saanich is fairly unique in that it's almost 50% rural and agricultural and 50% urban. So that presents a number of problems with urban and agricultural interfaces, and making sure that we protect and support farms and farmland and agriculture. And about 21% of Saanich is actively farmed. I'm sure Linda could tell you that there are a number of farm properties that aren't being farmed, and there are lots of young and entrant farmers that would love to get their hands on that land. So there's a bit of a disconnect with the land that's available and people who actually want to farm. So that's one of the things that we're looking to help find solutions to. So the Agriculture and Food Security Plan provides the district with a coordinated approach for supporting agricultural activity and improving food security in Saanich. And of course, with any sort of strategic plan or planning, it provides clear direction for decisions and actions over the next 10 to 15 years. It basically provides a roadmap for achieving the official community plan priorities around farming and agriculture and climate change. And it was the result of several years of extensive community engagement. A task force was struck. I suspect that some of you on this call were probably members of the task force, or you were involved with the community surveys or the open houses, meetings with local community stakeholders and organizations. They had pop-up displays, workshops, social media presence, and several presentations. So the process was very thorough and tried to engage as much of the community as possible. And it linked in with the other plans that Saanich has, including the community, official community plan and the strategic plan. And within those plans, there are expressed community values around making sure that we protect our agricultural land for current and future generations, making sure that we have access to safe and nutritious food at a reasonable cost, and making sure that there are opportunities for food production in both the rural and urban areas. And within the OCP, agriculture and food security policies support initiatives to ensure healthy and sustainable and stable supply within the region. We strongly protect the agricultural land reserve, make sure that we develop appropriate regulations and guidelines for future rural and urban farms and farming. And we want to encourage innovation in farming and local marketing. We want to improve soil capabilities. And of course, we want to encourage environmentally sound agricultural practices. So that's the OCP giving direction to the Agriculture and Food Security Plan. So the Agricultural and Food Security Plan was completed in 2018, and it's centered around 7 key themes. Number 1 is to provide a foundation to take action around agriculture and food security. And within those themes are a number of strategies and actions. So for example, create support and structure within the district of Saanich to implement the plan. So action number 1 was to hire me, which is great. My marching orders are to implement the plan, literally. So I think that set things up for success. And then one of my scopes of responsibility is to update other plans, policies, and regulations to advance food system priorities. So I'm involved in local area planning. I'm involved in bylaw and policy development, and always looking to insert agriculture and food security within those. And I do a lot of work with Linda and others, part of the PAC and the CRD task force and other initiatives to connect gaps in the local food system to improve food self-sufficiency, as Linda highlighted as well. So reducing barriers to local food access, enhancing community capacity to access local foods, those types of actions. We also want to strengthen awareness of the local food system. We want to celebrate local foods. We want to strengthen public education on the local food system. And again, Linda highlighted a lot of initiatives that are taking action towards that. We want to improve the interconnection between food production and the environment. And again, it's all one system. Agriculture doesn't happen in a vacuum. So we need to be aware of wildlife impacts and noxious weeds. We need to encourage sustainable water management. We want to manage land use to protect and support farmland. So Saanich has taken a really strong position on protecting the agricultural land reserve, which I strongly support. We're wanting to maintain the agricultural integrity of farmland. And of course, we want to, with all of this development and encroachment where you're finding development next door to agriculture, we want to reduce those conflicts between farming and non-farming areas. A really key and important one is supporting multi-generational farmers and emerging farmers. I think the average age of farmers on the peninsula is 55. And we've talked about the difficulty of emerging farmers to find access to land. Land is just so expensive. So we want to find ways to support multi-generational farmers so that their children see farming as a viable option. We want to support these young and emerging farmers as well. So within here are some examples. One of the things I'm currently working on is a farm worker housing policy to try and make it easier for those larger farms who need those seasonal workers to make it easier. And of course, housing for those workers is incredibly expensive and limited. So oftentimes farmers have to house them in hotels and far away. And so there's transportation and housing costs. So we're trying to support that as best as we can. A really important one that I've been focused on is number 7, which is expanding opportunities for urban agriculture. So increasing food production opportunities on public land and expanding opportunities for small scale agriculture in urban areas. Many of you have probably heard of the Jam Lady story, where a Saanich resident was selling some of her goods from a stand at the end of her driveway. She was selling jam, is one of them. And so I think a neighbor complained and it reached us. And so this became a high priority. And one of the pieces I worked on was bylaws around allowing you to sell what you produce on your property. And then when COVID hit, of course, the council moved quickly and implemented a temporary bylaw where you could sell goods and produce. So I'm a big proponent of expanding opportunities for urban agriculture. You look at places like Cuba, where the majority of their production is actually in the urban setting. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, and we want to expand opportunities for that. So, a plan is only good as the implementation strategy. And so the Saanich implementation strategy focuses on actions within the scope of municipal government. And it's vital that we collaborate with community partners because we can't do everything. And of course, through partnerships, we expand our ability to be successful with implementing the plan. And the way that it's been set up is 3 phases of priority actions. And those actions are ongoing. And so 15 phase 1 priority actions were identified. And I've mentioned a few of them. Writing the bylaws for being able to sell food at the end of your driveway or in your neighborhood was a high priority. Linda and I worked with the CRD to implement the Farmlands Trust. And so I did an analysis with some other Saanich staff on where are Saanich-owned properties that could be contributed to the Farmland Trust. And we suggested Panama Flats. I'm sure you've all heard of some of the controversy with Panama Flats. So we're looking at other properties as well. And I touched on a bunch of this, phase 1 priority actions, Panama Flats I mentioned, farm worker housing I mentioned, enhancing actions that enhance local food resiliency. So linking with the climate plan, I speak with the climate action folks all the time, and we're constantly discussing how the agriculture and food security plan meshes with the climate plan. So that's always top of mind. I also mentioned the CRD efforts to establish a regional food and farmland trust. We also are looking at opportunities to enhance business license bylaws to support protection of agricultural land. And of course, focusing on educational resources to help residents in protecting urban crops from wildlife damage. The other important piece is making sure that we're able to monitor and evaluate how the strategy is being implemented in our success. So there are 22 indicators that we track to measure progress towards the vision and objectives. And there are 2 to 5 indicators per theme, and they're aligned with other Saanich or regional or provincial priorities where possible. So for example, some indicators are the number of plans, bylaws, or policies updated to incorporate plan objectives. So I'm already, like I said, I've already implemented or written a few plans or bylaws or policies. So the number of business licenses for local food retailers, or the number of farms with community-sponsored ag food box programs. You guys can finish reading the rest, but some of them are spatial. So like the number of organic farms in Saanich, or the number of hectares within the ALR. So the other thing too is the plan is on the Saanich website. You can download it. It's formatted in a really easy to digest way. And at the end of it, there's a number of these performance indicators that we measure progress against. So that's the whirlwind tour of the Saanich Agriculture and Food Security Plan. The top email is my Saanich email. The bottom email is my consulting one if you wanted to get in touch with something that is not related to the Saanich Agriculture and Food Security Plan.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was great. Much appreciated. So folks, we've, first of all, thank you for our speakers. And you can hit the applause button, or you can wave or whatever. We've got a couple of questions in the chat box that I noted, and one was from Monica Wynn. And Monica, I think maybe you answered it, in fact, Linda, but Monica asked about data for food waste along the industrial supply food chain. And then she referenced Adel Guitoni, who does work at UVic's Gustafsson School of Business on that work. But Linda, you put a link in there into the chat box. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think there's actually quite a bit of data out there now in terms of, and I wasn't really sure of the geographic scope that Monica was asking about, but this study from York kind of hits all of the different sectors and their waste contributions, and it's quite good. It's fairly recent as well, but I think that there is definitely a lot of other work and studies out there. I know there was one done pretty recently also for Metro Vancouver, so I could dig that one up too.
And on the topic of waste, Pierre, I don't recall that was part of the, I guess because it's not a land use issue, it's hard to leave that in, or is it? Is it in the agricultural plan for Saanich?
It is, yeah. It's sort of in further down within the themes, but it is in there. That, as we talked about before, that's incredibly important around reducing and reusing the waste as well.
And then,
Trevor, might I be so bold as to jump in and just follow up on the question? It was actually a very specific question for this food dummy. How do I actually deal with right here, right now, with accessing food that is low waste. And I'm thinking a lot of times I don't get to the farm outlets. So if I get the stuff in the grocery store, of course, there's huge supply chains. I don't know all of what they are, but they're huge wastes along the way. I don't have much waste at home other than the plastic, which is of course terrible as well. But so do you have any concrete suggestions on how to deal with getting to the farm outlets, the low places, and or what, I mean, you touched on some of those, but I'm still confused, sorry.
So Monica, your question is how can we access food that is low waste? Is that what, I think I understand what you're saying. So yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, is the more that you can buy directly from the farm, you're gonna lose the waste that's associated with the transportation, the retail marketing side of things. But that's not possible for everybody to go to the farmer's market or to go to the farm gate. And so there are a number of box programs that are also offered through farmers, and that's the South Island Farm Hub is one that that we are working to support, which basically is a website-based ordering system where it buys from about 25 farms and 10 processors locally that contribute to the platform, and you can buy a harvest box. I'll put or order a la carte, and I would say that's a really good way also to access low waste food. But you know, this is a huge problem with packaging, and I think everybody going into the grocery stores and leaving their packaging as much as they can at the grocery store is always like a disruptor that the grocery store will soon notice. But there's also COVID is thrown a little bit of a wrench in this. I mean, we saw the plastic bags ban happen and then have to be rolled back, and now it's hopefully back on the table again. But you know, there's a whole bunch of new product lines out there for going and getting. You can take, so instead of getting the plastic bags at the grocery store and putting your produce or products into it, you can bring your own bags that are sanitary bags and things like that. But there was also the Zero Waste Emporium is the name of a store that I heard about. I don't know if it's still in operation right now, but there is some stores working towards either zero waste or bulk buying. And I would love to have a list of locations that we could go to. That's a good action item.
Trevor, can I just ask that people, there are a few that I don't know their locations, their municipalities. Would be great for them to add that in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, that there were a couple of the things that Linda was talking about were also mentioned in last month's conversation when Jill Doucette talked about the Project Zero initiative and the circular economy. So you might want to check out there as well. Let me put a different piece to this, and it's something I briefly raised with Pierre when we were talking earlier. The piece that I don't see in most of the food strategies, and interestingly enough, I went and looked, and it's not, for example, in the Climate Action Plan for BC, is the fact that an important reason why we have our large carbon and ecological footprint is because we eat a high meat, high dairy diet. And so I was interested to note that, as far as I can see, reducing the shifting to a low meat diet is not actually part of BC's Climate Action Plan. It's not part of Saanich's plan, I don't think, Pierre, but then it's a land use plan largely. So I guess that may be part of the reason. And Linda, I'm not sure where it sits within the Good Food Initiative, but I'd be interested in that because it's such a large chunk and it tends to get missed out.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think there's some reasons for that. And I think partially it's very, there's been a lot of research done. So there's a lot of competing research out there on this with a lot of different interests behind that research. And I've read a lot of different studies, and you know, the conclusion that I come to is that this is indeed a good strategy, is to reduce meat consumption and dairy and egg. And the challenge is that one, it's very embedded culturally and across different cultures differently within different cultural communities. And so we have a strong attachment to these long traditions of how generationally our families have eaten. And so that sometimes is a driving factor for people just have these food traditions, and so shifting away from them are challenging. And I would have to say that sometimes we've also had the benefit of really cheap meat because of these large industrial systems that we have. And so the fact is that from the research that I've read, that the way that meat is produced has a huge variance in the way that in terms of its energy use. And so low meat, or we went for I've heard of food literacy attempts to look at things like meat Mondays, or even to start with meat less Mondays, so that people begin to just make simple choices to reduce their meat consumption by trying to eat vegetarian one time or vegan one time a week, and to try it out and sort of get these understand how to shift their ability to source and cook differently. It's a big change. These are big shifts and changes. And I think the other thing to understand is that we, in terms of agricultural systems and sustainable systems, like, and especially thinking about Vancouver Island, like, animals do have a pretty significant piece in the farming system in terms of providing the nutrients to the soil and for soil building. And so in a mixed and integrated farm, they have a really important place to play. And so if we can try and encourage people to be looking at sourcing meats that are, I call them happy meats, they're produced in a way that provides a quality of life and safety for the animals involved, and also are contributing to the farms where they're being raised. But those meats cost more money, so then we eat them less and integrate them into our diets that way, so that we're not eating meat every night, but we're saving our meat budget for these more sustainable and climate friendly products. So that would be like, it's a very complex theme.
Pierre, did you have anything to add?
No, I was basically going to say the same thing.
Okay, I'm just looking, folks. We've got a couple of minutes yet. Two things. A note from Lorne Rennie to say that the Zero Waste Emporium on Douglas Street is very active. That's good to know that it's still there and still active. And a question, I think, from Greg Holloway. Here we are. But oh, sorry, I should point out Kim Kendall promoted a couple of things that she's involved with, a platform for sharing posters that promote activities and values called nowornevercoalition.org, and also a workshop in May being offered through the Esquimalt Rec Centre on what it really means to live sustainably. And then Greg Holloway asked, Saanich used to have community garden strategy with strong plan to create 12 or 13 community gardens by 2030 or something like that. Is that still alive?
It is still alive, and coincidentally, I've had a flurry of people interested in community gardens over the last month or so. So it's there. I think maybe Saanich could promote it more. But when these opportunities do come up, Saanich supports them and helps get them set up. So, and of course, there's always a waiting list for plots in community gardens. There's a huge interest. So we could definitely do more around that. When I looked at all of Saanich-owned lands for the Farmland Trust, we were basically asked to take out parks, not to look at parks for a farmlands trust, because Parks and Rec weren't ready to have that discussion, basically. But it is within several plans and strategies, and eventually that'll happen, that we'll look at food growing within Saanich-owned parks. I think that's a huge opportunity down the road.
And of course, there's one in my neighborhood in Gorge Park. There's a community garden.
We always tout that one as one of the more successful ones too. So
nothing to do with me, I should add, although I know the folks who run it. Okay, I think we've, it's 6 o'clock, and generally we try to keep to time. There are, however, a couple of questions. Maybe people could add to this in the chat box. Sue Andrews asks, are there any initiatives to run a program to educate people in sustainable gardening? And I suspect there's quite a lot. Linda? You're muted.
Yes, I was just trying to get it. So there is a wonderful initiative called Growing Together that is a whole, it is partnered with the City of Victoria and about 15 of the different nonprofit organizations and community organizations in town, and it helps to provide seedlings and seeds and supports, as well as there's a whole mentorship program where you can be paired with a garden mentor. It's a wholly volunteer driven initiative, but I'll put the website in the chat so people can have a look at it.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to call it a day at that, but we will be keeping the chat. We're going to stop recording in a moment or two. So what happens now is that, first of all, again, thank you, Linda, and thank you, Pierre, for your presentations and your responses. I know that both of them have to leave before we reconvene at 6:45, so we won't have another chance to thank them. So thank you for all you've shared with us.
thank you.
We're going to take a break now until 6:10, and at 6:10 we will reconvene or be reconvened into small groups. And Gertie and Claire, are there any issues or questions you have? If some people have let us know that they can't be in the small groups, which is important to know because we don't want to put people into a small group and then nobody shows up. So if you haven't already let us know and you can't join a small group, please do let us know. Otherwise, we will put you into the small groups at 6:10, and that will go till 6:45, and then we'll reconvene. The question to think about, or the questions to think about, is what does this mean for you in your neighborhood, for you in your municipality, for us in the region, for you in your lives? How do we shift to a food system and a diet that supports a one planet way of life, which our current system does not? So that's the basic theme to be thinking about in the small groups. And when we reconvene at 6:45, as before, what we want to hear back is any kind of aha moments, anything where you say, oh, this was wonderful, I never thought of this, or whatever it may be. Claire, Gertie, anything that we need to add? You're muted, Claire. Claire, you're muted.
There are a few people I don't have municipalities for, and you'll end up in an odd assortment of municipalities. That's the way it goes.
So we try and keep people together somewhat because we'd like to foster local connections, but on the other hand, we are all in the same region. So if it's not quite all Esquimalt together, you'll understand, I hope. Okay, thank you. And we will take a few minutes break and reconvene at 6:10 or just after.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you. And I guess you better stop recording, Claire.